Hello, everyone. We'll be going through part 6 of the client script series. And today we'll be focusing on client script's latest update, support for subforms and portals. Client script itself is a very hot topic that's discussed when it comes to CRM in the Click channel. Client script is something that comes up as a solution to a lot of problems that a lot of people, a lot of Zoho developers ask when it comes to CRM, right? And subforms and portals are something that needed support from client script. So far, we didn't have the support for that. Subforms has been supported only for the last 1 month, and portals got supported just 2 weeks back. So this is really some new hot updates that we are going to discuss today. So we'll get started with the session. So this is what we're going to discuss today. We'll have a quick recap of the previous parts, and then we'll talk about how client script is now supporting subforms and portals, and some key things to keep in mind when you're implementing them in your own business and in your own use cases. And of course, we're going to have demonstrations of the latest updates from client script in subforms and portals. And we'll see a few resources to help you stay up to date with these updates, not only with these, but also with the future client script updates that the CRM team is cooking right now. In the first session, we had an introduction to client script and we saw simple use cases. So client script, like the name suggests, it runs on the client side and it's a script that's written in JavaScript. That's very self-explanatory, right? But you don't have to think that it's limited to stuff that can be done only on the client side and only in JavaScript. So client script not only having a huge list of client-side APIs, it also has a lot of server-side APIs from which you can trigger deluge custom functions that are written in the backend, as well as third-party APIs to call third-party products or even APIs of different Zoho products from the client side. So, like I said, client script is written in JavaScript and it runs on the client side. So when a client script loads, it runs on the user interface or the browser of the user who is working on the CRM, right? So that's what client script is predominantly used for. And we saw a few simple use cases in part 1. These simple use cases were masking data in the fields that are visible to users based on their privileges, based on what role or profile they belong to, or hiding certain fields, not allowing certain users to edit certain fields, validating fields, automatically calculating the values based on the values in other fields and populating the results in other fields. So all these stuff that are usually done on that would make things a lot easier if they're done on the client side. You can use client script to do this. In the second session, we looked at a few advanced use cases, like how you can send mail from the client side using client script, how you can use widgets, and how you can use flyouts and pop-ups and callouts to show those widgets in the CRM. And we also took a look at how you can integrate third-party integrations from client script, right? So not limited just to client-side stuff that's done in JavaScript. And the third and fourth sessions were hosted by some of our power users who were gracious enough to share their real life examples, how they use client script in their businesses with some actual live demos. So that was really nice. And in the fifth part, we saw client script commands. So client scripts are linked to a particular module, a particular layout, a particular field, and a particular event that happens in that field or page. Okay. So only when that event occurs will the client script be triggered. Client script commands added a new dimension to client scripts. So without being tied down to an event, client script commands lets you trigger a client script by using a keyboard shortcut. So literally at the push of a button and anywhere within the CRM. So you don't necessarily have to be inside a particular module or a page to be able to trigger a client script. So that's what client script commands brought us, and that's what we saw in the previous session that we had like a month back. And this is what we're going to start with today. Client script in subforms. So subforms on their own are a very powerful intuitive data structure, right? Imagine having a multi-select lookup field where imagine the orders module. And inside the orders module, imagine a multi-select lookup field where you're linking it to a different product, different records in the products module, right? That's just not nice. So subforms lets you add a different data type, data from a different module into a particular record, right? So you can have multiple rows of data in your record itself. So subforms are very intuitive data structure that give you a nice pattern to work with. You can work with the subform. You have a lot of rows in the subform. You have the fields, the columns, and you have individual cells in which you can enter the data and play with them as you see fit. And now with support for subforms in client script, there are a number of events that the client scripts give us with which you can manipulate the data that's already in the subforms, right? We're going to take a look at some of those events now. For example, like I said, client scripts are linked to events that happen in some specific field, right? For example, if it's a text field, on the value change, you can trigger a client script. So there are certain events that are specific for subforms that are now being introduced, and we'll take a look at them in a little while. And support for subforms in client script is now available in all DCs. So irrespective of which DC your data is in, you can try your hand and experiment with this. If you were a part of the second meetup, some of the advanced use cases that we discussed, at that time, the client scripts were not supporting subforms. So we actually had to use widgets and use flyouts and pop-ups to show those widgets and then use that data to fill it into the subform, right? So we had to do a lot of workarounds just to be able to make working with data in subforms easy. And now with client script supporting subforms, a lot of those workarounds are not going to be needed anymore. So I hope you guys didn't have to put in too much trouble to create a lot of workarounds, because right now with the new support for client script and subforms, those workarounds are not going to be, a lot of those workarounds are not going to be needed anymore. So these are the events and pages in which subforms are supported. So like I said, every field has an event, a page has an event. So like that, subforms has its own set of events. And these are different events which can be used to trigger a client script when you're working with a subform, right? And like all client scripts, there are some pages in which some events are supported and some are not. So when you're starting using subforms in client script, just make sure you work in a page or a layout that already supports client script with subforms, right? Or else it's just going to be a lot of breaking your head over why it's not working, right? So these are the subform events. In today's use cases, we'll be using a lot of these events because, of course, we want to demonstrate how easy it's going to be when client script supports subforms. There are a lot of common functions, like I said. Each field has its own set of client script events that can be used to trigger a client script. And the subform events share a lot of those as well. For example, the get API name, the get value, set value, these are some things that are universal for all fields, right? And there are some APIs that are unique to subform. For example, insert rows, delete row, clear subform, right? These are unique to subforms. So some of these are being worked on by the CRM team. So just keep an eye out on the documentation whenever you're going to work on a subform using client script. Just make sure you have the latest up-to-date information so that you're not missing out on any of the latest updates, right? And some people have this confusion about what a field is and what a cell is, right? So before we get into the demonstration, let me just clarify this here. So imagine this is a subform, right? So this subform field row cell are the titles of the different fields in the subform, right? So this get API name is one row, this get value is another row, and this set value is another row. This subform is one field, the field is a field, row and cell are fields. Where these rows and fields intersect is one cell, right? So if I want to manipulate this tick, I have to access the cell of this row to manipulate this tick. Okay. If I want to manipulate all these ticks of all these rows, I'm going to have to access the field of the subform, right? I hope that's clear, because I had a little bit of confusion when I was working on the code for some of my use cases. So I hope that's clear. Let's go on. There are a few things to note. Like I said, there are some screens that the CRM, some pages and layouts and events that the CRM team is working on, which is not yet released to the public, right? Not everybody has access to the stuff that they are working on. So right now, there are a few things that you have to keep in mind when you're working on subforms using client script, right? So I'm not going to read through the whole thing. The first one is something that unfortunately is a limitation. The remaining four, right? For example, when adding a row and working in blueprints and guided selling and supporting mobile devices, the CRM team is working on, and hopefully they get it out to us soon, right? So make sure you are up to date, you stay up to date with the latest updates so that you don't have to create unnecessary workarounds and waste your time when you're implementing client scripts for subforms or portals for that matter. So let's get into the demo. Today, we are going to be seeing a lot of simple use cases, but why we're looking at simple use cases is to create these simple use cases, we had to do a lot of heavy lifting before client scripts supported subforms, right? So now we're going to see how with the new APIs that client script is helping, is supporting subforms with, how easily we are able to manipulate data in a subform using client script. Okay, so let me go into my CRM. This is nothing fancy. It's a very basic CRM. I already have a list of client scripts configured, but they're all turned off. So I have a contacts module. I have two contacts here. I have one deal. No quotes. We'll be creating the quotes soon. I have a number of products of different categories. We'll be working with these soon. And we have one campaign. And we have a verifications module, which we'll be looking at when we go to portals. Okay. So I have a number of client scripts already configured and turned off. So as we go through the use case, I'll turn them on and show you what I've done and how it helps. Okay. So like I said, support for subforms in client script is still a client script, right? So it is still linked to a module, to a page, to a layout, to an element on the page, and to an event, right? So whenever you're using, you want the same client script to be triggered for another event or another field, you'll have to make sure you handle that properly. Okay. So for the first one, I'm going to talk about filtering pick list fields. Okay. Filtering pick list fields is something that is very, very useful. If you have used client script already and filtered pick list fields, you know how simple it is. Let me go into my quotes module. Since this is created in the quotes and the create page, I'm right now in the create page of the quotes module. So when I create a quote, I want to add a product, right? There are right now, I think I have like 30 products here. I could filter all these products by clicking that icon there, clicking filter, smartphone, apply filter, and the products are filtered based on the category, right? And I have to click one because that's not a multi-select interface there. And then that's added here, right? What I want to do is, instead of going through all those steps, if I just choose the product category here, I just want the phones to be listed here, right? It is very simple. So I'm just going to turn on the client script that I've already written here. And since this is running on, since client scripts run on the client side, whenever you turn on or turn off a client script, and whenever you make changes in the client script, you will have to reload the page, right? Only then will the JavaScript be loaded on the user interface. So keep that in mind. Sometimes you might have to do a hard reload because browsers, they just love caching. So just let me reload that. And while that reloads, let me go into my code and show you what I've configured. So let me turn this off. I hope it's zoomed enough. So this client script is linked to a subform, right? And the event that triggers this client script is on cell change. So any cell in which the value is changed in this subform will trigger this client script. But we don't want this client script to be triggered in all the, whenever any cell is modified, right? Any value is edited. So I'm just making sure that the product category is being set. And then based on the product category, the value I'm going to get in this value here. So based on the product category, I'm just filtering the product names values, right? I'm getting the product name in the field object and I'm just setting a criteria. Very simple code. I've already refreshed this here. So now, since the product category is not set, everything is showing up. And now when I choose a product category, right, it just takes a lot of unnecessary steps out of it, right? It just makes the user experience a lot more easier to work with. So that's our first use case, right? Setting, by changing this value here, I'm filtering the values that show up in this in this lookup field. Okay, let's go into our second use case. For now, since this is loading on the client script for the sake of the demonstration, I'm going to turn off a lot of the client scripts as we move on to the next use cases. Okay, so I'm just going to turn this off. In the quotes module, when I choose OnePlus, let me see how many products I have of OnePlus. Right now I have 50. Technically, I shouldn't be able to order more than 50, right? If I choose 50, let's say 50 or more, this shouldn't be allowed, right? Before, what we used to do is whenever a value was updated here, when it was being saved, we used to check up there because subforms validation wasn't supported before. And now with the new support of client script for subforms, we can validate data when it's entered into the subform. Okay. So let me just turn this on and refresh this page. And I'll show you the code that I've configured. And this client script is also triggered on the cell change. So I'm making sure that this client script, the code here will be run only when the quantity is changed, right? I don't want this to be triggered every single time. So I'm getting the product name that's selected and using client scripts APIs from the products module, I'm fetching the quantity and making sure that the value that is entered in the field is lesser than the available quantity. Okay. So if it's more or equal to the quantity, we're going to get an alert, an error saying out of stock. So since this is reloaded, let me choose OnePlus again. And if I say 50, right? Right now, the code is configured. If I say if it's equal to or more than the available order quantity, is going to show an error, right? So if I say 49, I'll be able to place this order. Okay. So anything more, this is just going to throw an alert. The good thing is this will work with any quantity cell in any of the rows in this subform, right? So that's where it becomes very convenient. Of course, if with one row here, it seems simple, but when you actually apply this in your own businesses with your actual live business data, with your serious data, you'll see how easy it makes things for you. Okay. So let me close this. I'll turn this off and we'll go on to our next data. So now it's very easy to filter values that you're adding into the subform and also validate, right? But you might add too many because the subform support makes it easy to add a lot of data. So when you delete data, you might actually delete some actual valid data, right? So we want to have a backup plan in place so that we don't delete any necessary data that we might have a problem if we lose it, right? So I'm going to go into the deals. I have one deal, right? So I'm just going to go into the deals. So right now, if you look at this use case, the deal stage is identify decision makers. So right now it hasn't passed on to the proposal stage or the price quote stage or anything beyond. That's very serious, right? So till this point, I want the user to be able to delete these rows, right? Right now I can delete these rows. It's just going to go through a confirmation and it's going to delete the row, right? But what I want to do is once it goes into the proposal price quote, I don't want the user to be able to delete this, right? Because in the middle of the proposal, if you're going to change the items, that's going to cause a lot of confusion, right? So we want that to be disabled. So I'm going to go back to this previous stage right now. I'm going to turn on the row deletion. I'm going to show you, I'll just show you my code while this reloads. So I have a list of restricted stages in which I don't want order value or the subform rows to be deleted. So here I'm using the before row delete subform event. So whenever a row is going to be deleted, this event will be triggered and this client script will be run. So when a row is going to be deleted, this client script will run. It will check if the deal is in this stage, right? And if it's in one of these stages, it's going to throw an error saying you're not allowed to delete the deal once it's in this stage, and it's going to return false. So when it returns false, it's going to stop the deletion of the row, right? So nothing too fancy here. So if I go into the deals module, I forgot if I reloaded this. So right now I'm in the identify decision makers, and I'm going to be able to delete this. Okay, no problem here because not in any of the serious stages. So once I go to the proposal stage, I should not be able to delete this, right? So if the user tries to delete this, right? So there's this backup plan in place that makes sure critical data is not lost in a critical stage, right? So this is some really nice, a really nice touch that you can add to make sure your data is safe and secure, especially when it's in a critical stage. It all boils down to how creative you are and how you can think of the different scenarios in which you can use client scripts to your advantage in your specific business use cases, right? So I'll turn this off and we'll go to our next one. So this is going to be, we're going to work on the campaigns module for a while here. And I'm sorry for all these numbers. I've just added them so that I know in which order to go in so that I don't get, I don't lose my train of thought. Okay. So now we saw we saw deleting rows, we saw filtering cells in the subform row, we saw validating them, right? Let's look at another use case. Let me go into my campaign. Right now I have a campaign that's specific for North India. I'm very, very poor with geography. So right now I've just added Indian cities here. Okay. So I'm going to go into the edit page of the campaigns because this is where all of these client scripts are linked. So I'm going to go edit. Now for the North Indian campaign, I have a number of cities. Now when I add a row, I want this to be filled, right? I want it to be already in the planning stage. I want a budget to be a minimum budget to already be added, right? Because obviously we're not going to have a campaign with $0 as the budget. And when a new campaign is being added, the first stage should obviously be planning, right? We're not going to have it in an active stage or a complete stage when we're adding it to the campaign, when we're editing the campaign record, right? So that makes sense. So instead of having to manually do this every time the user adds a new campaign to this record, I'm going to use client script and the new support for subforms to automatically fill the data when a new row is added to the subform. So let me turn on this row auto population. And let me reload this page. You might have noticed that the campaign type of campaign disappeared. That's the work of this client script that's turned on here. I'll get to that point in a little while. So right now the row auto population is turned on. So when I add a row, I want the status and the budget to be filled. Okay. So I'm just going to add a row and it's going to fill the status and the budget to planning and $3,000 respectively. It's all about these little ways in which ClientScript makes the life of the user easier. It just adds up over time, and it makes it a pleasure, or at least not a pain to work with the CRM, right? So let me go into the code and just show you what I've done here. So here, instead of the cell or the delete row, I'm using the row add, right? So whenever an addition of a row is done to the subform, this ClientScript will be triggered. And I'm getting the subform, and I'm getting a row. Like I said, if you're going to access the field, you can just access the field from the subform, right? Because the field is common to this, is a property of the subform. But if you're going to set a value in a cell, you have to access the row, and you have to get that particular cell, right? You have to intersect the row with the field to get that cell. So I'm getting the subform, I'm getting the row, the index of the new row is going to be added. I'm getting it as an argument in this function here. And I'm crossing that with the field name, right? So this is the API name of the field name. And then there I'm setting the value to what I wanted to. So I'm setting the campaign status to planning and the allocated budget to 3,000. Something that you will have to remember is these API names are case sensitive. So when you're trying to get the cell, you have to make sure not to add the status or the budget with the $sign in the parentheses. You have to add the API names to make sure the cell is accessed right and the client script works properly as you want it to, right? So this is that client script. And as you saw, whenever I add a new row, it's going to fill the data with this. So I'm not going to save this because I don't want these new campaigns to be created here. So I'll just go ahead and delete this, and we'll move on to our next use case. So next, we are going to see subform clearing, right? We're just going through the different events that ClientScript is supporting with subforms here. So let me turn this on and reload this page. So what I want to do is, for the North Indian campaign, I've added a number of cities, right? So when I want to change this, I want to make a modification, I want to change this to South India. It doesn't make sense to have these North Indian cities here, right? And it doesn't make sense to have to edit all of these rows, to delete all of them individually and then add new ones, right? So when I choose South India, what's going to happen is it's just going to clear all the data in this campaign details subform. It just makes things a lot easier. So let me go into the client script. It's just one line. I'm getting the subform with the API name and then saying clear, right? And this happens so long we were working with, so long the client scripts that we were working with were linked to a subform, right? But here, the editing that we are doing is in this region field, right? So this is not a part of the subform. This is just a normal field which triggers a client script when the value is changed, right? So this is a field event of the region field. And when it's changed, we're getting the subform that's on the page and clearing the rows that are in the subform, right? So let me move on to the next use case. Let me turn this off and this off. Okay. So now, I haven't saved that, so I should have the previous data. Damn. Okay. So here I am using the CRM as Morgan Frederick. So Morgan Frederick is an administrator of this company. Okay. So I have another user, Edwin, who is a standard user. I have his UI here. So when Edwin accesses this user interface, when he tries to edit this campaign, I don't want Edwin to be able to access or edit the budgets here, right? Because he's a standard user. Of course, every organization has different users, different profiles with their individual permissions. So I don't want Edwin to be able to make changes to the budget here, but I want Morgan to be able to make changes to the budget, right? So I'm going to use a CRM, a client script variable, which gives me the role of the user, right? And based on that, I'm going to trigger a client script that disables the particular field of the subform. Okay. So I'm going to turn this client script on, lock budget. So I'll just show you the code. Let this reload in the meantime. So, okay. So in the campaign details, I'm getting the field. Like I said, the field is the vertical that you see of all the rows in the subform, right? So when I say get field, it's going to get all the cells that belong to the allocated budget in all the rows in that subform, right? It's going to be a list of cells. So when I get that field, I'm going to set the readability of that field based on whether the user accessing the user interface is an administrator or not. If it's not an administrator, I'm setting to read only. And if it's an administrator, the administrator will be able to make changes to the budget. Okay. So depending on which user is accessing this record is making changes to the record, the client script will behave differently. So here, this is going to be triggered when the edit page of the campaigns module is loaded itself. I don't want to wait for any particular cell or field-based event. So as soon as it loads, I'm going to turn off the editability for Edwin, right? So here you see the budget is all editable for Morgan. But if you go into Edwin's user interface, right, all the budgets are disabled. So he can add a row, but he will not be able to make changes. Okay. One thing that you have to keep in mind now, if I add Chennai here, right? I'm sorry, I know Chennai is not North Indian city, but if I add Chennai, because it's a mandatory field, will not be able to add the budget because this is disabled, right? So because of this, it will not be able to save the record. So when you're using different client scripts, right, you'll have to make sure of how they interact with each other, of what side effects you have. Here's where guerrilla testing really comes in hand, right? So you'll have to make sure that you don't have any unwanted side effects when different client scripts interact with each other. Okay. So right now, Edwin is not able to make any changes, but Morgan is able to because he's an administrator. Right. So based on the profile of the current user, the readability of the allocated budget field changes. Okay. Next, what I want to do is, so you see this status, even if Morgan is an administrator, if the status of a campaign is complete, it doesn't make sense to allow Morgan to be able to edit the budget, right? Because the status is complete. Why would he have to edit this? And after the status is crossed the planning stage, once it is active or inactive, again, it doesn't make sense to allow Morgan or anybody else for that matter to be able to make changes to the budget. So even though Morgan is an administrator, if the status is complete or active or inactive, I want to disable these budget cells so that there's no changes will be possible. Okay. And if the status of a campaign is changed to planning, I want this to be enabled. And if it changes to complete or anything else other than planning, I want it to be disabled. Right. Very intuitive to make sure there's no errors that happen when data is being entered into the CRM, right? So right now, this is allowed and it doesn't make sense. So I'm going to turn on this one first. I'm going to turn on this status on load client script and we'll see how that behaves. So this is tied to the loading status of the edits module, right? So if it's complete, I'm locking the entire record because obviously allowing the user to make changes to the city also doesn't make any sense. And if it's active, this is okay, but I'm not letting the budget be changed, right? So this is loaded, right? Let me just show you my client script. So as soon as the edit page is loaded, I'm getting the campaign details cell, and I'm checking whether the status is complete or planning, and I'm either changing the editability of the entire row or the editability of only the allocated budget, right? Again, nothing too fancy going on here. So the loading makes this work, right? But I also want this to change. When I change the value of the status, I want this to be disabled. I want the entire row to be disabled. So for that, the onload function is not going to cut it. I'm going to make sure to create a client script that triggers when this cell value is changed, right? So instead of the client script being linked to the on loading of the page, I'm going to have to link it to the on cell change of the subform, right? So I have that already created here. So I have another client script here with the exact same code, right? So I'm just going to reload this page. So on load, this is being changed. So when I change the active to planning, it's going to get enabled. And if I change the planning to complete, it's going to get disabled, right? Again, here, when I add a new row, for whatever reason, if I change this to complete, I will not be able to enter a value here in this mandatory field, in this mandatory cell, right? So saving will not be allowed because budget also is mandatory. So again, you'll have to make sure you take care of the cross interaction and side effects when different client scripts interact with each other, okay? Okay. So now, even though the person making the changes is an administrator, he is limited by logic, right? By logic, he's limited to what he should be allowed to do in the record of a in this subform, right? Okay. I mentioned this, right? So on load, there was that one field that was being hidden. I just turned that off. I'll just show you here. Okay. So this campaign type is universal for this record, right? This campaign type is individual for the different sub campaigns that are linked to this main campaign. So if the main campaign type is set to something, it doesn't make sense to have this field visible here, right? So beyond just enabling or disabling the subform rows or cells, what you can do is also hide unnecessary fields so that the option to edit them is just not shown in the first place at all, right? So before you give a chance for the confusion to arise, you just get rid of the opportunity and you hide this campaign type here. That's what I'm doing here with this onload function. So if I turn this on and show you my code, so I'm getting the type of campaign of the main, no, I'm sorry. So this is the campaign type of the main record, and I'm checking it if it's something specific, right? So if it's something specific, this is if it's something specific or if it's others, right? So only if it's others, I want the type of campaign field to be visible in the subform, right? So if it's something specific and not others, I'm just hiding this type of campaign in the subform, the field in the subform. And if it's set to others, then each sub campaign can have its own type. So I'm turning on the visibility of the type of campaign. So this works when the page is loaded. So I'll just reload the page, right? So something specific is set. So it doesn't make sense to show the type of campaign for each sub campaign. So if I change this to others, like I said, client scripts are linked to a particular event, right? So when it loaded, it made sense because a particular type was set for the main campaign, so it made sense. But if I want the client script to be run when it's edited, I have to configure another client script when that value is changed, right? So on change, I'm going to turn on this client script here. It's the exact same code. but this will trigger when the value is changed, when the type of the main campaign is changed, the client script will be triggered, right? So right now it's direct mail. So we don't have the type of campaign visible here. If I change this to others, okay, and we have the campaign type shown here, right? So now you can make changes to anything you want. So again, see the row that has been disabled is set to none because it was hidden. And now I won't be able to save it. So again, make sure there's no unnecessary cross interaction, right? So I'll just turn this off. And now all the mandatory fields are set. So I'll be able to save this, right? So whenever there's not a need for a particular field or any particular field, even in a normal record to be shown on the screen, you can just use client script to hide it from the user based on your use case. So I'll turn this off for now. And now we're done with the campaigns module. So I'll just turn these off. Let's go on to the next use case, the budget, right? Now adding subforms and autofilling the budget is so easy that by mistake, we might overshoot the budget, right? So let me just reload this page, right? So since this is loaded on the client side, you saw that the client side, the client script was still active, even though I turned it off in the screen. So whenever you make changes, you enable or disable or edit the code in a client script, make sure to always reload your page or maybe even do a hard reload to make sure it works the way you want it to. Okay. So right now this is configured in the detail page, right? So I didn't have to come to the edit page. Let me reload this just to be safe. Okay. Right now, the total budget for my main campaign is $20,000. And right now, including the budget for all the sub campaigns, I'm at $5, $10, $15,000. So when I try to add a new city, I should not be allowed to reach the total budget, right? Or maybe even go beyond this, right? This should not be allowed even for an administrator. So we want some sort of validation to be done. In the previous, which use case was it? When we were checking the stock, we checked the value that was entered in one cell and we went to the products module, check the stock, compare it and show an error, right? So here, what I'd like to do is add all these values here, add all these values in the budget field and make sure it's lesser than the total budget. So rather than just comparing the value of one single cell, I'm going to sum all the values in this budget field and compare it, right? So I'll just turn this on and I'll just show you my code. Okay. So before the row is updated, right? I don't want the client script to be run after the row is updated because that's just going to, not serve the purpose, right? So before the row is updated, I want this client script to be triggered. I'm getting the total budget from the page. I'm getting the subform and I'm iterating through all the rows in the subform, right? So like I said, if you want to get the value of one cell, you'll have to access it through the row, right? If you want to access the field, you'll have to access it through the subform. So right here, I want to get all the allocated budgets of all the individual sub campaigns. So I'm iterating through all the rows in the campaign details subform and adding them and just checking if the main total being surpassed by the total of these sub campaigns, right? And if it does get equal or more, I'm just going to throw an error and return false. So like I said before, when I return false, it's going to stop the update of the row, right? You'll have to return true for the row update to go through. So right here, I don't want the update to be done. So I'm returning false and stopping the update. So let me reload this. So right now, I'm at $15,000. So if the budget goes to $20,000 or more when I add a new sub campaign, it should throw an error, right? Let me say $6,000, right? So budget exceeds the total budget allocated. So what's happening is all these individual budgets of the sub campaigns are being added together and the sum is being compared with the total budget. So irrespective of what the values are, dynamically you're able to calculate, manipulate the data, perform whatever computation that you want to do on your data, and again, do whatever you want with it using the subforms, right? Using client scripts with subforms. So right now we are done with the subforms support from client script. So before I go on to the portals, I just want to show you one thing if you're new to client scripts, right? So here on this panel that I had to keep closing each time, you see the details are going to trigger a particular client script, right? And here you have the library. So if I click here, client script has a lot of client APIs. And when you click those APIs that were visible in the client script IDE, you'll see all the different client side and server side APIs that are supported by client script. So the CRM team is constantly adding new updates to this. So whenever you're working with subforms, just client scripts, just make sure you're up to date with the latest documentation and updates. This is where you access that library. Okay. So these are our use cases for the subforms. Now let's go into our portals. If any of you are new to portals, imagine, let me give you an illustration. Imagine a hospital as a CRM organization, okay? In the contacts module of the hospital, there are going to be users of different types. For example, there are going to be doctors, there are going to be nurses, patients, higher management who are not going to be involved with the treatment stuff. There are going to be people in the contacts module who are going to be helping with purchasing medicine and say storing it in the inventory, right? There are so many people in the contacts module who are of different types, right? And not all these people need to be able to access all the data in the CRM. For example, a doctor would need to access only maybe his list of appointments that he has for the day or the week, the status of the clients that he is treating, right? And a patient who's in the CRM may need to access only the time and status of their individual appointment, maybe the receipts for the payments that they've done at the hospital, maybe the prescriptions that they've got from the doctors, right? So not everybody needs to have access to all the data. So in such a situation, when you have different portals for different types of users in one organization, that's where portals come in, right? You are allowed, you get the flexibility to share only certain data that is relevant for a particular type of portal user, right? That's where portals come in, okay? So again, they're still going to be able to access the pages or the data from a CRM user interface, right? So right now, for the past 2 weeks, client scripts are supporting portals as well. You might think that because there are so many different types of portal users, it's going to be hard to get client scripts to work in all of them. But it's very simple. If you've already created a portal, once you go to your portal screen, you're just going to see a button that says enable client scripts for your portal users. Just click that, and client scripts are going to be enabled for those portal users. Okay, so it's simply that easy. And do you remember the use case where I showed the client script variable, the $CRM one, where we checked the user, whether he's an administrator or a user with lesser permissions, right? So we're going to use the same $CRM variable to access the portal type or the type of the user who is accessing the data, right? So based on that, the client script can be configured to behave differently based on what portal the user belongs to, right? It's that simple. So using the $CRM variable, you can target different portals, different user types, or even individual users if your use case requires it. Okay. And right now, if you already have a portal, you will have to enable client scripts for those portals. If you're creating a new portal, client scripts will automatically be enabled, right? And there is a deadline, November 1st, before which support for all existing portals will be turned on automatically without you having to go and click that enable now button, right? So if you want to have early access to it, feel free to go to your portals and just click enable now and have client scripts enabled for your portals that you've already configured. And if you're configuring a new portal, client script will automatically be enabled for the new portal types. Okay. Again, we have some things to keep in mind when we are working with client scripts. The $CRM will give you the data about the portal to which the user belongs to, from which portal they are accessing the user interface. But the org and the environment variables will not be necessary when you're accessing, when a portal user is accessing the user interface, right? So there you will have null returned. So if your client script is using these variables, you will have to think about how your client scripts will work in different situations. If they're going to be used by a user in the organization or a user from a portal, you'll have to go through your client scripts and make sure you review them to make sure they work properly, right? Because you don't want your client to face any issues, right? If a CRM user, of course, we don't want that to happen as well, but it's worse when a client faces issues on their user interface, right? So you want to go through your existing client scripts if you're enabling them for portals and review them and make sure you don't have any malfunction when they get triggered. Okay. And there are a list of actions that will not be supported in portals. And these are those actions, right? So again, if you already have client scripts configured that you're going to be using in portals, make sure none of these cause any malfunction without your knowledge, right? So make sure you go through them and just play it safe. Okay. So now we'll have a quick demo of client scripts and portals. Like I said before, I have a verifications module that I'm going to be using for this. So the verification module, let me just do, okay, I have the contacts here. So I have two different types of contacts in my CRM. Okay, Charles is a client, Samuel is a vendor. So they'll be accessing the portal from two different, they'll be accessing the data from two different portals. Okay, so if I go into my settings and go into portals, right, the client has one user, which is going to be Charles, and the vendor has one user, which is going to be Samuel, right? So these are, I've already invited them and they've already joined the portal. This is what you see here. So let me just close this for now. So this is the client portal, and Charles is going to be able to see only data that is relevant to him, right? He won't be able to see vendor data, and the vendor is not going to be able to see any other data. He's not going to be able to see Charles' data. So only if the email ID matches, based on that, I'm showing the relevant data here. Okay, so these are two different portals which we'll be using for this demo. Okay, so if I go back to my contacts, and here in the verifications module, I have one record in which I'm going to use my client script and see how client script is supporting portals. So using this client script use case, I'm going to show you the interaction between three different types of users. I'm going to show how Morgan interacts with this record and how his interaction is going to affect the interactive ability of Charles and Samuel, right? So we have two users who belong to two different portals, and we have the CRM user also who are going to be interacting with this same record. Okay. So it's a very simple use case. The contact to be verified is Charles. So since Charles is a part of this record, he will be able to see this record here in the verifications module. And the person who is going to be verifying Charles's record is Samuel. So since Samuel is a part of this record, he will be able to see the same record in his verifications module. Okay. I'm sorry, I do realize that the UI is a little bit confusing, but the purple one is the client and the orange one is the vendor. I'm sorry, I do realize that it can be confusing. Please bear with me. It's not going to be too complicated. Okay. So right now, Charles has entered his social security number / Aadhaar card number, right? And Samuel has to verify it. Right now, the verification status is in queue. Okay. So in my use case, what I mean when in queue is it hasn't gone to Samuel for verification yet. So right now, I want Charles to be able to edit his social security number before it goes for verification. Okay. After it goes for verification, I don't want him to be able to edit this status. Okay. And sending this to the verification process should be done only by the CRM user. I don't want Samuel to be able to edit this value and take the record for verification, right? Because there's still some level of control that Charles has over his data. Until the CRM user decides that it's ready for verification, Samuel will not be able to do any sort of modification to the verification status. Okay. So right now, let me check if okay. Right now the client script is disabled, and of course this is the vendor portal, and since this is the client's data, the vendor will not be able to edit it. And since this is in the queue, Charles also, the vendor also will not be able to edit it. He should not be able to edit it. Okay. But since he has to be able to edit it when it goes into the next stages, right now it's turned on, right? When you're configuring your portal, if you turn this to read only, you won't be able to turn it back on. So he is allowed to change it, but using client script, I want to make sure that if the verification is in queue, the vendor doesn't have access to change the verification status. He'll have to wait for the CRM user to change the verification status to one of these to be able to make changes, right? And in the client portal, right now it's in queue. So Charles is able to edit this, right? But once it goes out of queue, this has to be disabled for Charles, for the client. So that's what we're going to do with our client script here that we've configured for our portal. So let me just turn this on and go into my client script. Again, nothing fancy here. I'm getting the main verification status, right, which has to be changed by the CRM user, by Morgan. And if the person accessing it is a vendor, right, if it's in the queue, I'm setting it to read only. He should not be able to change the verification status. If it's not in the queue, if Morgan decides that it's ready for verification and he changes it, then the status won't be in queue. And then the vendor will be able to make changes. So then I'm enabling the editability, right? And if the person accessing this user interface is the client, I'm getting the social security number or other card field, and I'm checking if it's in queue. If it's in queue, he should be able to edit it. They should be able to edit it. So the read only will be false. Once it goes to a verification stage, the read only will be true, right? So if it's verification in progress or approved or denied, the client will not and should not be able to make changes to his social security number or Aadhaar card number that he's entered. Okay. So based on which CRM user accesses it, so based on his profile, the client script will behave appropriately. Okay. And this client script is linked to the detail page of the verifications module, right? So whenever we are in the detail page of a record in the verifications module, on load, this client script will be triggered. Okay. So now I've turned this on. Let me reload these. Okay. So this in queue was editable for the vendor, right? So right now the client script has come into action and it's disabled it because the verification status is still in queue. The vendor should not be able to make changes. So it's turned off, right? The read only is enabled. And if we go into the client side, because it's still in queue, Charles or the client is still able to make changes to his social security number. So let's make Morgan make a change to this status. So let's change it to verification in progress. So now the vendor should be able to access the verification status field, and the client should not be able to access the social security number or the Aadhaar card field. Okay. So let's reload this so that the status is updated. So now, since the status is verification in progress, the client is not able to make any changes, right? In the client portal, this field is disabled. And now if we go to the vendor portal, this field has been enabled now, right? So Samuel can make changes to this field. So based on which portal a user is access, which type of portal the user is accessing the data, the CRM can be the client script can be configured to behave appropriately, right? And you just saw how easy it was. I didn't have to jump through any hoops to make this work. All I had to do was, again, go into my client scripts and just create a normal client script and just turn this on, right? So since this is in the verifications module in the detail page, this client script will also be triggered in the user CRM, right? In the administrative CRM. But since I've filtered the type of user for which the client script will be run, there's not going to be a lot of client script that's going to be run in this user interface, right? The client script, most of the client script will be run only in the vendor side or in the client side. So this is how you can take advantage of client script in your portals. Okay. So the documentation is constantly being updated by the CRM team because they're constantly bringing access to different pages, to different events for different types of fields that you have in your CRM modules and records. So there's always some sort of update that they are doing. And just keep an eye out in the documentation. The client script has very extensive and quite elaborate documentation that you can take advantage of. So make sure to go through that. And we also have a Kaizen series. So the Kaizen series is focused on CRM. Okay. The Kaizen series also has a sub series that is focused on the client script. So every year, the updates that come to client script are added as posts in the Kaizen series. So if you haven't checked these out, make sure to check them out. A lot of these use cases that I used for the demonstrations that I used today were taken from the Kaizen series, so that when you access the Kaizen series, when you go through these posts, you'll be able to access the code directly, and you'll be able to play with these same use cases in your demo or test CR. Okay. And the Kaizen series is not linked to just client script. For example, here you see there's an API subseries, there's an SDK subseries, and more. So feel free to check this out as well. So here's the client script roadmap. Like I said, there's so much in the works. The last session was on commands. This session was on the support of client scripts for subform events and APIs and portals. And we have a lot more that's coming up. So let's have a recap of what we discussed in today's session. We saw what client scripts were. We saw how subforms and portals are now being supported by client scripts. We saw a lot of things that you have to keep in mind, things that you have to take a note of when you work with subforms and portals using client scripts, especially when you're deleting data and editing your data. You have to be very careful, right? And make sure you're not trying to make client script work where it's not yet supported, right? So make sure you go through the documentation, stay up to date with the documentation, and then work with client script whenever you're doing so, right? We saw a number of demonstrations of how subforms and portals are now being supported by client scripts. A lot of these, especially the subform events, we had to use widgets. We had to jump through so many hoops to make the client scripts work with subforms. Simple stuff that we did today, which seemed so simple, seemed so complicated just a few months back, right? So if you have subforms in your CRM modules, if you're already using client scripts, if you already created workarounds for the support of subforms in your client scripts, make sure to check out the newly released subforms support. I'm pretty sure you're going to have a very easy time setting those up and using them, right? And we also saw a number of resources like the documentation. I showed you the API documentation that can be accessed from the IDE, and we also saw the Kaizen series. So make sure you stay up to date with those before you work on the client script, because the team is always coming up with something, is coming out with something new, right?